Hey guys, it's Nicole here from Bake to Jour, and let's start a sourdough starter from scratch. Here I'm starting with some warm water, and I'm going to take equal parts water and flour and mix it together. So we've got water at 78 Fahrenheit or 26 Celsius degrees, and we are going to mix 50 grams all-purpose flour, 50 grams white whole wheat flour, and then I'm gonna be adding diastatic malt powder. And this is gonna really help break down the starches in our flour and get more sugars available for wild yeast to eat and to grow. I did 1 gram of the diastatic malt powder, or about 1/4 of a teaspoon of that. Mix it all together and really take note of what your starter looks like at this point. It's thick, there's no bubbles, there's no volume to it. Kind of note how thick it is in your container, and then you're gonna put it in a holding place that you can kind of keep at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an ideal temperature for 24 hours this first day. After 24 hours, check on your starter and let's see what it looks like. There is a nice crust over the top, which is very normal. If I were to have put a top over it, it might have not happened so densely, but just peel that back if that happens to you as well. You can tell this is, half whole wheat flour too, because of that rich brown color. And that's just also to get things moving and to allow for more food for our yeast that we're trying to grow here. Peel that back, smell it, see where your starter is at. It's very weird and it looks like you did something wrong, but keep going. This is gonna be our second feeding on our second day, and I'm doing 1 to 1 to 1. So take the same amount of your starter, mix it with warm water again. You want it to be around that 26 Celsius, 78 Fahrenheit. Mix it all together with equal amounts of flour. I am only doing all-purpose flour now. Mix it really well so you don't see any dry flour parts. And then this is your first feeding on the second day. And then once you've mixed that starter, put a top on, or don't if you have a proofer like me. I was just trying to see if it would help the skin not form, and the difference was not notable. So you can have a top on, top off. If you're out at room temperature on the counter, definitely put a top over your container. And then I let this sit for 8 hours. We're gonna do a routine of having our starter sit for 8 hours and then 16 hours, 8 hours and 16 hours, until we see some real activity and growth in our starter. So this is my starter 8 hours later on the second day still. The ratio is gonna be 1 to 1 to 1 again. And I am taking 100 grams of our starter, 100 grams of that warm water, and 100 grams of all-purpose flour, and mixing that really well. And then I'll let this sit for 16 hours, so overnight, and then we'll feed it again in the morning on the third day. A mature starter will grow 3 times in volume in about 8 to 10 hours. So we're kind of looking and monitoring our starter until we see that kind of growth. Here we have just mixed it. Again, note what it looks like, smell it if you'd like, and then put it back into your holding spot for another 16 hours until we're at day 3. Here we are at day 3 after 16 hours. We have a tiny bit of volume, but not too much. But I do see bubbles, which I was very excited about. Pull back any skin if you see any. Don't transfer that over when you're feeding your starter. And then we're gonna do the same thing, 1 to 1 to 1. I've stuck with really small amounts here because I hated throwing away all of this other starter. The discard isn't good yet, so really there's no use in trying to put it into recipes. So I'm throwing away my discard, and it made me sad, but it's okay. We're starting from scratch, and that means there's gonna be more discard that we're tossing. If you're interested in getting your sourdough starter to be mature even faster than this, then definitely check out my last video on the easiest way to get started on your sourdough starter. So after this feeding on day 3 in the morning, I waited 8 hours and fed Miss Henrietta Dose is her name. I fed her a second time. I did not record this, however, because there weren't any noticeable changes. So here we are on day 4 in the morning. Let's take a look at how she looks. I'm seeing more volume. Definitely, like when you jiggle it, you can tell there is some action going on in there. At this point, I'm getting super excited to use Henrietta Dose to power an entire loaf. I feel like things are moving and I'm very encouraged. So we're gonna do our first feeding on that 4th day here, and we're gonna mix it up, keeping that 1-to-1 ratio with the warm water and the warm holding spot. So I'm continuing to keep my starter at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm really happy that I had that Broad & Taylor proofer to do this because my room temperature is not that hot. Most people's room temperature is not 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And I do think this quickened the process up a good deal. So get yourself something that you can keep at that nice temperature to really foster growth, or this might take a few days longer. And here we are 8 hours later for our second feeding on day 4. She looked very ready and was rising quite a lot. So I am feeding on day 4 again after 8 hours, 1-to-1-to-1. Once this was all mixed together again, I put it back in my 80-degree proof box. And then this is 10 p.m. at night. It doesn't look like it because the Alaska sunshine, but this is one that I didn't feed at all since after the morning, and you can tell like it has some big activity going, and I was really excited. And then this is the one I had already fed twice, and so I wanted to just make sure it was nice and fresh, and I fed it one more time on this 4th night. So we're doing 1-to-1-to-1 yet again, and then I also left her out at room temperature this time, just to see how she fared at room temperature and to gauge from my other starter, kind of gauge off of that and compare how they grow together. And she grew a lot, you guys. So if you check out here where it was at in the evening and then the morning, it rose a lot. She was quite ready, I thought. So I fed her in the morning, and I was gonna start my mixing later in the afternoon to power a loaf. But of course, I wanted to do the float test first to make sure so I didn't have a super dense loaf and ruin a ton of flour. And voila, we have some floating starter, you guys. She passed the test. So stay tuned for my next video to see if Henrietta Dose actually was able to power an entire loaf on day 5.